So the first session, we're going to start right out of the gate with a nod to this building, the legislative update. And I'm pleased to welcome on the panel Representative Andrew Murr and Jim Allison. Representative Murr is a member of the TIDC board. He's a state representative for District 53, based in Junction out of the Hill Country. Before that, he was a Kimball County judge and Kimball County attorney. And the thing that is most interesting about him for his role on the commission is he also is a general practitioner attorney and handles criminal cases, including appointed cases. So he knows this issue frontwards and backwards even better than the rest of us. And following him will be Jim Allison. He's the longtime general counsel for the County Judges and Commissioners Association of Texas, longtime advocate for county government here at the Capitol and around the state, and has been a longtime friend and ally to the Indigent Defense Commission, and before that the task force, in helping us establish this program now almost 16 years ago. It seems crazy. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Murr. We're going to speak, and we're going to allow some time for questions at the end as well. So,
good morning, folks. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, I know it's morning time and we've all had our eggs and our bacon and we're just sitting here ready for the caffeine to slowly take effect. So, again, my name is Andy Murr and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today. A couple of topics I think that you will find interesting because in one way or another they're going to apply to what you do. And you will find that some of these changes are simply proposed and the legislature hadn't acted yet, but remember, it's a slow-moving beast and typically takes several swings at the axe in order to get anything done, and that takes years. And so what I want to start with is bail bond reform. And you probably read an article or two about it. You probably heard a few discussions. But let me step back and give you a political perspective from it. So ideologically, you will find that there are two primary drivers to this topic. And on one end of the spectrum, it has to do with those that have been arrested and are stuck in jail. And so you will find a lot of folks advocate for those members that are stuck in the system awaiting to go to trial. At the other side of the coin, the driver there is cost. And as a constitutional county judge where I got to sit down and make a multi-million-dollar budget every year, this was a big driver for that, because if you have someone who simply can't make bond, they're stuck in jail, the county is responsible for their needs, including their medical expenses. They typically have a court-appointed attorney, and as a court-appointed attorney, I can tell you that they have nothing else to do but to write me letters and call me, and so it ends up taking more expense while they sit there waiting to go to trial. And so what we found was, is there a methodology that we could apply as policymakers in order to get what you would consider to be folks who don't necessarily need to pay a high bond out, because we know they're a low risk of reoffending, they're a low risk for missing court, as at the same time try to keep your high offenders who do have the means to make bond to stay in jail. Because we oftentimes, you will hear a prosecutor or a judge sometimes lament the fact that it doesn't matter how high I set the bond, that person was able to get out, and we're very concerned about what they might do in the community. So the effort was a two-part thing. So I teamed up with Senator Whitmire in the Senate, and we drove this effort. So what you'll see here, you've already read some of it, it would have implemented the recommendations of TIDC. However, during the process, there are lots of stakeholders that stepped up and wanted to have a say in the proceedings. And we found that the bondsmen have a very strong voice when it comes to the lobby, especially in urban areas. And so they advocated for major changes to the bill. At the same time, from every end of the spectrum, we found that both those ideologically on the left and on the right had certain reservations about portions of this. In order to fully take effect, you needed a constitutional amendment in order to keep some people in jail without a bond. And that piece was dropped in order to allow it to proceed in the Senate. And at the end of the day, I'll sum up, it passed the Senate through a large effort on Senator Whitmire. And in the House, the bondsmen came out, and they were very strong. So where I live, I personally know some of the bondsmen. But in other areas of the state, they went to members, especially newer members that hadn't served in office long, and they said, look, this is my livelihood. You do this, I'm out of a job, my family needs a roof over their head and food to eat on the table, and by doing this, you're attacking your own constituents. And so they made an argument there that their money-driven system was more important than some of the rights of the folks that are either in jail or, frankly, we'll call it other taxpayer dollars that are being utilized to keep low offenders in jail. What we have found instead is, since it died in the last days of the session, is that it's not dead completely. We're going to have to turn around and do it again. And I think we actually educated a great number of people. What you will find, though, is legislators typically have to come back again and again. And I'll give you a prime example. Texting while driving. So that ban took 4 sessions to take effect. And we can all agree that driving down the road distracted, whether they are putting on makeup or reading a newspaper, is not a good idea, and I don't want to be driving next to someone doing that. But it actually took 8 years for Texas to implement that as a law. So whenever you talk about a major change in policy, it's also going to take a while. And so everyone has to be prepared for the long haul. I think also when you consider the ramifications of what we're proposing, the headlines that folks would read about it scare the average uninformed consumer. And those are people who they've never had an experience with the criminal justice system. They really don't know what a judge does. They can't tell the difference between a county prosecutor and a district attorney. So for them, it's a challenge, and all they read is that sound bite. And that's the other thing that you have to do, is educate consumers about it. Senator Whitmire worried a great deal about bail bondsmen and how that was interpreted in the media, and he spent a great deal of time in his district in the Houston market dealing with that. At the end of the day, I still think there's a strong advocacy to be made here. I think that you are able to team up folks who worry about rights of arrestees that are in jail and the cost of keeping them there when they don't necessarily need to be there. I've talked to judges who really would like extra tools in their belt to say, I can identify right up front, in rural counties especially, someone that I grew up with, someone that I know, someone that's known to me. I'd like to be able to let them out in an easier manner than what we do. At the same time, they know of people who may be a high risk. I'll go back and point out one other feature that I found typically raised eyebrows was the fact that we place a lot of focus on a bond as a method for making people show up for court. The downside is the magistrate has no clue and is not required under the law to know if they have ever missed a court date. So this was part of that process, was to be able to build a system that was readily available. So imagine this, and this is what because I come from a rural part of Texas, you have to make sure that those folks are going to be comfortable with it. It should be as simple as dialing into a website, typing in a person's name, maybe their SID, and waiting for it to run a quick check. And then it pops up green, yellow, or red. And I'm not saying that's the system that would be utilized, but imagine if you were the magistrate doing that. And it would pop up green. That's telling you that there's nothing, it should be a low risk and they should go ahead and you should be able to release them. If it's yellow, you need to read a little bit more and you make a determination. If it's red, you need to read a lot more. And that gives you a default to the current system in place where a cash bond might go in. At the end of the day, not a single bill or version of the bill ever advocated doing away with the magistrate's discretion. And that's the final thing I want you to take away from that, is I did have judges call up and say, why are you getting into my business? Why are you questioning my judgment? And we're not. We're trying to give you tools that would be before you, whether you're doing it remotely or at the jail, so that you know more additional information about that person's criminal history and whether or not they've shown up for court and what type of actions are there. In certain jails, it's great. There's a good relationship between law enforcement, the jail staff, and the magistrate. In others, the volume is so high, there's no way for you to gather that information conveniently. So at the end of the day, all of this will be done, but only because we're going to preserve the magistrate's discretion. No one wants to get into that territory. And I do think that we place a great deal of confidence in our magistrates, and we should never shy away from the fact that there is a human element there that's very important, and you can't legislate that. My grandfather always said you can't legislate common sense. And so that's not what we want to do with any bill of this. What I would tell you is if you have questions about it, please ask. If you don't do it now, you do it later. Call me sometime. But at the end of the day, we're going to try to make another swing at this if there is another way to do it. And so we will try to address reasonable concerns about it. We'll look at doing that. Real quick, I'll get into the next a piece of legislation that we were successful on, and then I'm going to let Mr. Allison wrap up on that. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled unconstitutional 2 of the items on the laundry list on the bill of costs that you see every time you do a plea or at the conclusion of trial. So we know that the court clerk breaks down what those court costs are. And so what they said was, not only is it unconstitutional, but we're going to give the legislature a little bit of time to fix it. And so we fixed it by redesignating those 2 line items to go to the Indigent Defense Fund. And what that does is it creates a new method for funding how we pay for court-appointed attorneys. Now, if you'll recall, back in approximately 2001 or thereabouts, the state came along and said, we're going to make counties pay for the cost of the court-appointed attorneys. And we have watched that steadily grow and increase, and I think Jim can speak to it. What we've run into is how to best pay for it. Right now you have a grant program in place in which the counties are on the hook for the costs, and then the state has a grant program that's administered through TIDC. It is a reimbursement grant, which means you had to do all the things. You have to show that you incurred the costs, and then you turn around and you can get monies. But you'll find that the grant itself is deficient because it doesn't fully pay for those costs. So from that local perspective, there's a lot of frustration with judges, with your budget makers, with treasurers and auditors about this growing problem that we have. This should, at the end, be able to provide a new revenue source. What we'll see right now, though, is while it was authorized, we did not get the appropriation. So there's two methods when the legislature works, and this is always challenging. You can pass a law that says you can do something, but if it has money attached to it, you still need to go over to the state budget, and you've got to put it in there to spend it. So it's the same as your household sitting down agreeing to sign up for a new program. But then you still got to go to the checkbook and write a check and distribute the funds. And that hasn't been done and won't be done for the next biennium. So we'll have to wait till the 2019 session in order to do that. And Jim, I think you might want to follow up with just how big a problem funding this has been.